When Conrad said,
yes,
after Taylor said,
you think you're just gonna drive off into the sunset with her?
a lot of us thought that he was just being sassy Connie again. But here's what I think was really going on. Conrad had some conversations with a few of the other people in this episode that I thought were really important and said a lot about how much he's grown, where he stands with Belly, and where things might go from here. I want to start with the conversation that he had with Taylor. The fact that Belly has not told Taylor at this point what Conrad said to her last night, but Taylor knows something is up, says a lot. So right off the bat, I actually don't blame Taylor for questioning Conrad and trying to see what his motivations are. I think even being Team Conrad, it doesn't mean that we can't, dissect things with a clear mind and look at the history and see why Taylor might be hesitant to have Conrad pursuing Belly again when Taylor is Belly's best friend and doesn't want to see her get hurt. There's this sort of misconception that if you're Team Conrad, and I've received these comments as well, that you think he's above all accountability, and that's just not true. Taylor knows firsthand how much it hurt Belly the first time that they broke up, the first time that their relationship didn't work out. She knows how much it hurt Belly to have Conrad give and take away and pull back and not communicate with her. So like I said, I don't blame Taylor at all for wanting to question Conrad and see what his motivations are. And so when Conrad tells Taylor it's none of her business and she says it actually is, I agree with Taylor. Nobody wants to see their friend get hurt. And one thing about Chris Briney's acting that I've noticed and really like is how he acts a lot with his hands. I know we've talked about sort of like his facial expressions and his eye movements and those kind of micro movements that he does, which I think are just fantastic. But if you pay attention to his hands, he's always kind of doing something with them. They're a little tell of his and they always give him away. And we notice that here when Taylor says,
She cried herself to sleep last night. You just you treat her like this.
Conrad doesn't actually say anything back, but he says a lot with his body language, and you see him kind of fidgeting with his hands. He's obviously affected by the fact that Belly cried herself to sleep last night. And I kind of think this was my favorite part of this conversation.
Really, what do you expect to happen? You think you're just gonna drive off into the sunset with her? That she's just gonna blow up her whole life just because you suddenly remember she exists?
yes. No, it's not like I just suddenly remembered that she existed, Taylor. It's that I never forgot. Ever. Not for a second.
Because like I said at the opening of this video, a lot of us thought it was just the return of Sassy Connie from season 2, and maybe it is a little bit, but I also think it's Conrad realizing that now is the time for him to be open with his emotions. After learning about Jeremiah sleeping with Lacey in Cabo, I think Conrad realizes that he has nothing to lose if he's just honest, not just with Belly now, but with everyone. He disappeared 4 years ago and made himself scarce because he thought that Belly and Jeremiah had this great, healthy relationship, and I think after learning that that's not the case, he's just done. And I don't think this is a bad thing, because not only is it the right thing for him to be honest with Belly, but also be honest with the people around her and in her life, because like I said, Taylor is Belly's best friend. I don't blame her for questioning his motivations. I would do the same for any one of my friends if I thought they might be on a path that could potentially get them hurt if I didn't have all of the information. Taylor hasn't talked to Conrad in many years, and we also know Taylor wasn't always Conrad's biggest fan, so she's going to be kind of examining what he's doing and why, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, like I said, because she is her best friend and friends are supposed to be looking out for one another. Taylor doesn't have all of the information. She only has the information that Belly has given her over the years, and we all know Belly is a little bit of an unreliable narrator, and Taylor also doesn't know why Conrad pulled away 4 years ago, why he struggled to be present in that relationship with Belly. Yeah, she knows that his mom passed and he was probably grieving at the time, but she doesn't know about his promise to Susanna or any of that. So from where she stands, it probably does look like Conrad is just kind of toying around with Belly. We as the viewer know that Conrad has grown a lot and he's put a lot of work into himself, and that he's coming back into a potential relationship with Belly as a very different person than he was the first time they were together. But like I said, Taylor doesn't know any of this, so I don't think some of Conrad's responses here are him just trying to be sassy. I think it's just him trying to be honest, and also he's probably very tired at this point of shoving his emotions down, and confessing his love for Belly probably just opened the floodgates, where he's thinking to himself, I was honest about the most difficult part of this last night with Belly, and what's the point of me kind of keeping it all in now? So then when Conrad explains his feelings for Belly to Taylor here,
It's not like I just suddenly remembered that she existed, Taylor. It's that I never forgot. Ever. Not for a second. And I don't know, she can try and push it down all she wants, but I don't think she forgot either.
Taylor can probably sense that he is genuine. And I think when Taylor tells Conrad that he is not capable of being the person that Belly needs, that really hits a nerve for him. Because I think that's actually Conrad's deepest fear.
Look, if you keep this shit up, you might get what you want, maybe she gives up everything for you. It's possible. But I don't think that you're capable of being the person that she needs. And I think you know that.
That he's never going to be capable of being the person that Belly needs. I think he felt that way 4 years ago when he was struggling to balance his grief over losing his mother with his love for Belly and trying to be present in a relationship with her. And I think that's why he was willing to give up and let Belly go when he thought that Jeremiah would be better for her. I think the fact that he didn't confess his love to Belly until he found out about Jer sleeping with Lacey in Cabo says a lot about this mentality of his. Because when he thought he wasn't the one who was good for her, he was willing to stay away. And then when he realizes that maybe Jer isn't good for her, it kind of changes everything in his whole mentality. He even said that during his beach confession. He said that he was scared that he would keep hurting her, and so he needed to let her go. So even though Conrad has done a lot of work on himself at this point, and he's been in therapy and done a lot of, I think, self-reflection, hearing this comment from Taylor probably just really triggers that part of him that has always felt like he's not good enough. You know, we give a lot of attention to the fact that Adam put kind of this rift between the boys by making them very competitive with each other, which is true, and that as a result of that, Jeremiah often felt like he was second best and not good enough, which is fair, but I think we don't pay enough attention to the fact that Conrad feels that way too. Just because his parents propped him up as the golden child doesn't mean he felt that way. It doesn't mean he actually believes that he's better or has, you know, that confidence inside of him. So Taylor ends their conversation by saying this.
I would say do the right thing and let her go.
And you just see on Conrad's face that he's processing everything she said, especially the comment about him not being able to be the person that Belly needs. That being said, I'm still proud of Conrad for the way he is communicating in this episode. You know, a lot of people criticize him for not being an open communicator, which is fair, but then when he does try to be open and communicate, you know, people are mad at him for that too. And there's the argument that, oh, well, he's doing it, you know, the day before Belly and Jeremiah's wedding. But I have to counter that by saying, would you rather him like wait and, you know, let them get married? And, you know, when he didn't know that Belly knew about Lacey and Cabo, again, would you rather him have waited until they were married to share that with her? So that's just my take on it. I think he is trying to be kind of open with his feelings with everyone. He's not lying to anybody. When Taylor asked him, are you envisioning the two of you kind of running off into the sunset together? He's not lying. He's been completely honest and saying that is what I would want. And I can't fault him for his honest communication when in the past we have faulted him for not communicating honestly. So then we have the conversation between Laurel and Conrad, where Laurel asks Conrad how he's doing and how he's handling everything that's going on. And I, for one, have always liked their relationship. Their relationship is touched on a little bit more in the books, but, you know, they kind of have a similar dynamic to that of what Belly and Susanna had.
How are you doing with all of this?
It's killing me.
So it was nice to see Laurel checking in with Conrad and seeing how he's doing. I kind of feel like no one has really done that, and I know a lot of them just assumed that Conrad was over Belly, so maybe they didn't think to check in on him and see how he's doing. But I want to kind of pause here and talk a little bit specifically about that point, because I think them doing that, you know, the rest of the friend group not really checking in on Conrad and how he's doing, is a little bit of a miss on their part. It strikes me as odd that 4 years ago, after Susanna died and after Conrad and Belly broke up, that nobody thought to kind of check in on Conrad when he just disappeared for 4 years. They kind of give him a hard time for that. We'll get to the Stephen and Conrad conversation later, but for me, if I had a friend go through all of these difficult things at once and then they just kind of disappeared, moved to a different state for 4 years, I wouldn't just assume, oh, they just left. I would be quite concerned that something is off, something is wrong, and we should check in on them. So when Laurel asks Conrad how he's doing, and he replies with, "It's killing me," and Laurel doesn't look the least bit surprised, which I think we kind of knew after the conversation with Laurel and Conrad in the diner several episodes ago. We know that Laurel knows that Conrad is still in love with Belly. And I believe that Laurel knows that Belly on some level still loves Conrad too at this point. Throughout the series, we've been shown a lot that even when Laurel and Belly are at odds, that Laurel knows her daughter very well. And I think there's always been a reason that they've shown us those kind of little flashbacks and storylines showing us how well Laurel knows Belly. You know, there was the one where Belly thought she was ready for a big girl room because Susanna kind of encouraged her in that direction, and Laurel had a feeling that she wasn't, and Laurel turned out to be right. And this isn't about Belly's mom, you know, thinking she knows best or being a know-it-all. It's just the fact that she does know her daughter really well. So even though nothing has really been said to that effect at this point, I do strongly believe that Laurel knows that Belly is still in love with Conrad as well. And I think it's a big part of the reason why Laurel was not really that supportive of Belly and Jeremiah's marriage. And obviously there's a lot of reasons. She has been very open with many of them that she wants her 21-year-old daughter to finish college and see the world and travel and become a well-rounded person. But I also do think on some level that there is that part of Laurel that knows that were Belly to go ahead with this marriage to Jeremiah, down the road she might regret her decision and feel like she rushed into a relationship with Jeremiah when her heart was kind of not fully in it. So I really liked this scene. I always like the scenes with Laurel and Conrad because I do think they have a really sweet relationship. I'm glad that Conrad has Laurel. I kind of feel like at this point in season 3, he doesn't really have anyone. He hasn't had a lot of people that he can talk to about his feelings. I know he's in therapy, but even in therapy, from what we've seen, he doesn't fully mention Belly or bring her up. And maybe there is some element to it that we don't see, but I think if that were the case, that would have been shown to us. So even though they don't really say a lot of words and Conrad doesn't say a lot about Belly to Laurel, Laurel knows, and I'm glad that Conrad just knows that there is somebody who cares about how he's feeling. And he ends their conversation by saying this.
I'm gonna go to bed before they get back.
Okay.
He says, "I wish," and then he kind of cuts himself off and says that he's just going to go up to bed. And I really want to know what he was going to say. I wish that he would have kind of finished that sentence to Laurel. Okay, now to the conversation between Conrad and Stephen. So Stephen approaches Conrad asking him if he's seen Jeremiah. And we know Stephen's pissed from the get-go because Conrad makes a joke about how it's bad luck to see the groom before the wedding. And you can just tell from this.
Yo, have you seen Jer?
Isn't it bad luck to see the groom before the wedding?
Okay, I'm not in the mood, Fisher. Just tell me if you've seen him or not.
No.
Then Stephen says this.
Not that I'd want to see you if I were him anyway. I can't even fucking look at you, man.
And Conrad learns that Stephen knows about his love confession to Belly and the fact that Jeremiah knows. So Stephen talks about the fact that Conrad disappeared 4 years ago and Jeremiah stuck around and Jeremiah is his best friend, and he lists all of these reasons why he views Jeremiah as his best friend.
Jer's my best friend. I've barely seen you in years. All right, I see Jer every day. He has Thanksgiving with my family. He has the spare key to my apartment. He calls my grandmother Harmony, for fuck's sake. You are the one who disappeared.
And he kind of ends that monologue by saying, "You're the one who disappeared." And I have to return back to what I said in the scene between Laurel and Conrad, where I'm confused by Stephen not being more concerned that Conrad disappeared. They used to be so close, and it's not like Conrad disappeared kind of out of thin air. He disappeared right after 2 major negative life events happened to him. His mother dying and his breakup with Belly. And I know Susanna was Jeremiah's mother too. I always get those comments where it's like, Jeremiah's mother died too. But I'm talking about Conrad disappearing and taking off and not keeping in touch with anybody. Again, I know it's really hard to say that everybody would act the same, but if I had a friend who had a parent pass away and shortly after they were going through a breakup with somebody that they've loved essentially their whole life, and then they just disappeared, I would be very concerned about them. I don't think I would be angry at them. I don't think I would hold it against them. I would actually, like I said, just be really concerned. I would be concerned about their mental health. I would be worried that they're not doing well. And when they came back 4 years later and seemed sad, as Stephen was saying, I would be even doubly concerned that, the last time I saw you, you had all these terrible things happening to you. Then you left for 4 years and you came back and you still seem to be struggling mentally. I don't think I would make it about myself and say, oh, you never texted me, you never called me, you don't show up at Thanksgiving. I think my prime feeling would be that of worry. And maybe I shouldn't project, the way I would react in this situation onto these characters in a television show. And we've talked a little bit about their ages. They're all in their early 20s, which no, they're not children. Yes, they are adults, but some of the maturity that, you take into interpersonal relationships and friendships comes with time and age. And maybe maybe people in their early 20s aren't quite there yet in the place that I'm describing where you would be worried about your friend's mental health. But that was just the first thing that came to my mind. Because I have had friends pull away after a death in the family, and I have had friends pull away after difficult breakups. And generally, my feeling is just that of concern for them, like I said, and not so much about you didn't show up to this or you didn't show up to that. So while I can understand and empathize with the fact that in this moment, Stephen's prime concern is for the well-being of his little sister, he's feeling very defensive over her. I do understand that. I was a little bit confused about the way he is approaching his feelings about Conrad having disappeared 4 years ago. So after Stephen says, "You're the one who disappeared," Conrad says this.
Yeah, and now you know why.
Stephen ends their conversation by saying this.
Be the good guy that we all thought you were.
Essentially implying that Conrad has become someone who's not a good person, which is so interesting when we've seen Conrad really work on himself over the past 4 years and change, and kind of he's trying to become better at being open and honest and communicative. And like I said, I try to understand where all the characters are coming from. I try not to just kind of keep tunnel vision, despite what some people may think. So I do, in a way, understand where Stephen is coming from, that he knows Belly is upset that Jer is missing, and he knows that Belly's probably reeling from Conrad's love confession, so he feels this defensiveness for his little sister. And I don't fault him for that at all. I think that actually makes him a really good big brother to Belly. Like I said, I don't think he was a very good friend to Conrad. I think it was unfair of him to fault Conrad for pulling away after everything that happened 4 years ago. And I don't think it's fair to him to have faulted him for not staying in touch when, if I were Conrad, I would be hurt that, like I said, after everything he went through, if I moved to California and none of my friends reached out to check on my mental health or see if I was okay, I don't know how I'd feel about that. I don't think I'd feel great about it. And the most important and interesting thing in all of this is that Stephen is missing a vital piece of information. He still does not know that Jeremiah slept with Lacey in Cabo. And Conrad doesn't tell him that in this scene. And it's so fascinating to hear Stephen implying that Conrad is a bad guy when I think Conrad not telling Stephen about Lacey in this conversation that they're having is actually because he's probably trying to do the right thing. I'm wondering if at this point Conrad thinks it's not his place. I don't know. I can't really get into his head. And I'm trying to sort of keep the books separate from it. One, because I know not everybody has read the books. And two, I think sometimes in a series like this where there has been a lot of changes from the books, you almost have to view them as a little bit separate. But Conrad decides for whatever reason not to tell Stephen in this moment about Jeremiah sleeping with Lacey. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. As I mentioned, he could think it's not his place in this moment. Or he could also be thinking that he doesn't want to use that as a defense against himself in everything that Stephen is saying. I feel like there's a part of Conrad that does feel really guilty for leaving to California 4 years ago and not really staying in touch, even though it was incredibly difficult for him to stay in touch. And it was probably difficult for him to know that all of his friends moved on while he moved away basically in a very heartbroken state. And for him to know that his brother got into this relationship with Belly, knowing that he was still in love with Belly. I know everybody references that motel scene where Conrad tells Belly that he changed his mind or whatever and doesn't want to be with her. But I think we all knew that Jeremiah knew that wasn't true. They had this conversation the night before. I'm talking about that night in the motel where Conrad made it very clear that he was still in love with Belly. And this is where I question Jeremiah again, where the switch up in Conrad's behavior as a sibling, as a brother, I would think you would kind of dig underneath that and say there's something else going on here. Last night he told me that he loved her and he was clearly very distraught. Now he's saying he doesn't, and then he just moves away to California and doesn't really stay in touch. Like, wouldn't that raise kind of alarm bells for you? Anyway, I'm just trying to get into all of their heads to try to figure out what they're thinking and their motivations. And even though I can understand where Steven and Taylor both were coming from in their conversations with Conrad, I felt like they were both a bit harsh on him because, again, they only have bits and pieces of the information, both of them. I get that Taylor's not that close to Conrad, so I don't necessarily expect any different from her, but Steven and Conrad used to be best friends, and I'm a little bit disappointed in the way that Steven has treated Conrad, not just in this conversation, but over the past 4 years. I think I've said, a lot about that already, and I don't want to just keep, beating the same point into the ground. I do still think Steven is a pretty level-headed person, and he's a character that I genuinely really like. And without the information about Lacey, I get where he's coming from in wanting to stick up for his little sister on her wedding day. So I see kind of both sides of it, which I always try to do because the point of me kind of doing these deep dives is to get into the mindset of each character and try to hold empathy for them. Some of them make it really hard, so it's easier for some characters than others. But I actually really hope that, even though it's not the focal point of the last 3 episodes, I hope that Conrad and Steven can find their way back to a friendship together because that's what they used to have, and it's kind of sad to see where they've come. So Conrad was really having a rough go of it this episode. He had a lot of criticism against the things that he was saying and doing from the people around him, but I genuinely don't think his motivations were bad. I think he's just gotten to the point where he's figuring that if he's been honest with Belly about loving her, then he might as well go full in and be honest with everyone else as well. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think if the only way that Belly and Jeremiah could have gone ahead with their wedding and the only way that the marriage was going to work is that things are kept swept under the rug and everyone was silent, then it wasn't really built on a solid foundation anyway. Like I've said before, if Belly didn't have feelings for Conrad, him confessing her love to her wouldn't have done anything. It wouldn't have bothered her. She wouldn't have felt anything about it. They would have just kind of moved on and gotten married. I think all that Conrad's love confession did was reveal the cracks that were already present in Belly and Jeremiah's relationship.